it's supposed to rhyme so that it can help us like remember.
Oh, really?
Dissect the human psyche and society. Get it? Yeah.
Eh.
Dissect because knife. So there's a whole bunch of like mnemonics that are involved.
Dang. That's
Yeah.
really deep.
Yeah, I try. I do what I can.
Wait, does psyche and society actually rhyme? It's only the
Yeah.
last thing that
It's still right.
psyche, society.
Psyche. Yep.
Nuh-uh.
Yeah.
Denzel's a
Yeah.
poet, so
It's true.
but I'm also not a poet, so
It's true. It's kind of like saying orange and door hinge.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're right.
People be like, yeah, you can make a whole bunch of stuff. I learned all of this from Eminem. He's like, yeah, people say that you can't make stuff
Master.
rhyme, but like honestly, if you just like say words in a little bit of a different way, then you can make them rhyme and you can like put words. I'm like, whoa, changed up the way that I write my poetry and raps.
Mm.
Yeah, it's artistic.
All right. Welcome to the Knife Show, where we dissect the human psyche and society. I'm Joyce Meng, and I'm an INFJ.
And my name is Denzel Mensa, and I'm an ENFJ. And today we are visited once again with our lovely guest, Lilette, the ENTJ. And we are going to be discussing the concept of shame. Now, shame is a very broad topic. It was kind of brought up in our last episode. I hope that you guys have already seen by the time that this is posted. Nonetheless, yeah, it's a broad topic, but we started getting into it in the last episode and then we had some time to think about it. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about it. The biggest thing that I remember kind of stating was that my stance was more so that I feel like there's not really a necessity for shame in our society. I think that it does. I'm reevaluating to make sure if I really still believe this part. I want to say right now that I believe it does more harm than good. Um, Now, maybe that's not entirely true, and I could have my mind changed on that. But I do, at the very least, believe that it does a lot of harm, and it doesn't really get to the root of an issue. Like it doesn't really resolve things. It just causes people's thoughts and feelings and emotions and all of that to go into hiding, without actually like dissecting and getting to the root and reassembling how the person's mind and logic and way of viewing things is changed up, framework, and therefore now having them move through the world with a different perspective. So I think that there are better ways to do it. It just requires more patience, which we live in a world where patience is very, very, very rare. So that's my icebreaker.
I do have the same beliefs as you, Denzel. To play devil's advocate, sometimes you could say that there's a there's a perfect amount of trauma to grow a person. So there's a crippling amount of trauma that causes people to not think and actually become weaker or less resilient as a result. And there's actually trauma that can actually make you learn how to adapt in a way that you can learn to use your intellectual capacities more through navigating that challenge. And I'm probably explaining it incorrectly, but in a sense, like shame in the moment, if it's just for that moment, can be a growth agent because there's some pressure of you realizing something. But if shame is past that moment of action and you hold it past when you can do anything about it, then it's probably very toxic to a person. But overall, as a fellow NFJ, I also believe that shame is almost like in all circumstances bad. It's just that I find like as NFs, we can be very idealistic about it. And so I wonder if there are actually positive instances of shame because if we have the emotion, there's some purpose behind the emotion. And so it tells us something about what we're lacking
Hmm.
or about how we're social animals. And so, in a way, although shame is this thing that we should not give to others as much as we can, it's also the thing that we all share with one another. And it reminds us of how interconnected we are. Because when we feel like we don't belong or we are wrong and that we're not good enough to be a part of everyone else,
Mhm.
then we actually psychologically feel the impacts of it. So it's a reminder that we can't be in silos. But Lilette actually had a question she wanted to ask us, and that she could also answer herself. So I thought I'd pass the mic to our wonderful ENTJ here.
Yes.
Um, so before I ask the question, I actually, because I love just kind of the intros you guys have given, just basically your like top line, like what do we believe right now? This could change over the course of the conversation. So I'll also state what my first impression is. Impression being, I think we've kind of like had this percolating in our brains for, all of our lives in different times, but then also plus the 2 weeks, that we've had. And I've legitimately written things down just so I can remember and build on it. But, in general, I actually do believe that uh, I think I live a life of entropy. I'm a big believer of it, and this kind of like developing of self by um, sometimes, at times, painful expansion. Um, and that to move to a different phase, um, or even to change at all, we have to have a required amount of energy, um, motivation, to do so. And there's positive and negative emotions, and they all vary in intensity. Shame is one of the most intense negative emotions, and it is an ingredient, an agent. It can be an ingredient or agent for change. In the same way that love can cause someone who's been stubborn about changing to change, and that's regarded as a positive emotion most times. So yes, it's an agent for change, and that like the underlying assumption there is there's a certain amount of energy required to change. Period, whether it comes inherently or externally. And shame is also a judgment passed by maybe yourself or by others. And like Joyce was saying, it's this reflection. Sometimes people are very unaware of the effect that they have on others. I think I can really attest to this, having Effie's eighth slot. And shame has been personally a really useful tool to keep me in check, because I have said some really mean things that I was unaware of. And if someone had combated me on that, I would have come to bat with a rationalization or something like that. But kind of the secret sauce to really motivate me actually is my emotions.
Mhm.
And so it was a very powerful agent, like kind of direct access, like the Death Star, Luke Skywalker shooting into the Death Star kind of um, access. It's a access directly to the heart, and I think shame actually is there's different things that reach different parts of us, and shame goes to the heart. It is directly tied to the heart. Denzel, you mentioned that it takes patience to get to the root of the problem, and that shame doesn't actually address it. I think shame as a I kind of see it as a tool. I think it's really hard to get away from like TE seeing things as tools, but shame does or can I should say can mask the problem, but it can also bring it to attention. It has the propensity to make one wonder why they're different, make one wonder why they are experiencing such negative emotions and why people are doing certain things. I think, especially for those who would benefit greatly from having self awareness and reflection, would actually benefit the most from shame. And so I mentioned this previously in the previous video that kings and queens, the people who are in the top echelons of power, would actually benefit most from feelings of shame because there's not much people who can stand against them. And I can bring this up later, but the origins of the jester, someone higher than the king to pass judgment on the king himself, to turn the crowd against him with a critical eye, to acknowledge that he is indeed human and human first, king second. So yeah, that's my first impression. But let's get into the questions. So my question is kind of addressing like an intuitive thing. I was telling Denzel this, like
Mhm.
intuitives, I feel like can fall into not talking about actual concrete examples. And we could really benefit actually from pulling in every once in a while personal experiences and reflecting upon them. Or maybe that's like kind of an ENTJ thing. I'm not exactly sure, but with SI. But anywho, let's what is you what is a time in your life where you experienced shame and a time where you gave it? That is the question.
And the question is, if you're in an Asian family, when are you not being shamed when you're around your family? So when you talked about the upper echelons of queens and kings that would benefit from shame, another group that I think would benefit from shame is traditional Chinese people who are very set in their ways and they are bad parents. It's kind of like a form of communication within Asian people is just insults every single day, nonstop. Even your pet name is an insult too. Like it's like good for nothing, smelly, dumb. Like they like it's just how they communicate, and it's common with a lot of like more olden style families. And so, as an NF or as an INFJ, that can be quite horrifying growing up in that culture because you just find it a very shameful culture. And I do have the belief like Denzel that shame has no right place because of growing up in that kind of environment where it's used wrongly all the time. Just like how when someone is born in a very angry household, you then start to connotate anger as a bad thing inherently when it actually isn't. But in all the uses you've seen it so far, it has been bad. And so when it comes to living in a household where they get you to motivate you to do things out of shame, that is a really bad place of doing things. Because shame can be a beginning, but it can't be the end. And so they use it as a mechanism to get you to get good grades, to behave, to do better than your peers. It's competitive. Shame can sometimes be used as a tool to measure you against other people. And they say that the way that you can make yourself depressed or sad, like is to compare yourself. There's a saying that I'm blanking out on right now. And so oftentimes it's ineffectively used that way. Shame can be a good starting place to understanding something. So, like, let's say there's this one time I moved back my chair and I actually ran over my cat with my chair by accident. And my cat is like the most innocent, kind being. And I accidentally hurt it. And that moment of brief shame I had where I like questioned my life and like hurting an innocent being was actually good for my life. Because, like, if life can make you feel desensitized, shame is actually a way to sensitize you. So if you're out of touch with actually emotions, if you're feeling jaded or depressed, or uh, out of touch with something, your humanity, shame can actually jolt you back into why you care about things. So that's an example of shame being the starting place to me thinking more about what I do and like actually being more careful with my life. And like that small instance with the cat kind of reminded me like, wow, I'm really not paying attention to what's around me. I really need to be more aware because I'm hurting people with my lack of awareness. And this is a metaphor for my lack of awareness in general with other areas, because we all have blind spots. And so that was an area of helpful shame for me. And so I find that shame is good when you don't end up having shame for shame's sake, because I feel like people can get addicted to their emotions and they can just loop in it. And I think something that I'm very aware of is like sometimes you can start a shame loop in someone and not know it. Like Asian people will say things trivially and they don't know that that kid is going to carry that for a lifetime. Like I find some Asian families are penny wise, pound foolish. And so like they think insulting you in the short run will help you save money. It's like, oh, if I shame you into being someone who's very tight with money, then you'll grow up to be an adult who's good with money. But ironically, a lot of Asian kids end up going to therapy, which spends way more money than they would have spent if their parents have never shamed them. And so there's this opposite effect that shame can have, because it can either result in you showing how much you do not get the other person. So instead of using the tool of understanding, of patience, of love, you actually default to the quickest tool of shame. I feel like you misuse it. And it's also sending a tool to someone that you might not even care to get to know them and not care to know their motivations or why they did it. And you're just like blanket writing them off as a bad person. Whereas, like, if you use shame, but you use it in a skillful way, like you can still actually communicate that you know who that person is. You might just not agree with certain things of why they do what they do. And it's the starting place to curiosity and exploration. And although shame is usually used to cut off curiosity and exploration, it doesn't have to be that way. Oh, and the time that I've shamed someone, my apologies if I'm going on a little bit. I fired my parents. I was like, you guys are incapable of being parents. And I was like, because they're immature. I could notice their cycles and I couldn't respect their cycle. And I didn't want to, like, I shamed them, but in my head, because I didn't feel the need to voice it, because I knew if I voiced it, I simulated how that would go. And I'm like, they're not going to change if I voice it. So I'm just going to keep it to myself. So it's really been, shame is usually internally experienced as noticing the sustainability or the cycle of what someone does or their pattern and not respecting it and actually like seeing it as, I guess, even like inherently bad in the context of shame, but it's not like bad. I just find it's in all contexts it would not contribute to flourishing, which is why I consider it to be not good. And so there is an element of shame to that because I do put it down in some way.
I think one of the first things I was thinking about was how when I think of shame, then I'm mainly thinking of like like not necessarily self-imposed shame. I'm thinking of shaming others, imposing shame on other people. So I think shame that we feel within ourselves, almost like a guilt, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's bad. Um, Not always, at least. But I would say that the shame that we use to like guilt other people, like that's what I feel like, okay, that's not okay. Like if somebody's like having sex outside of marriage, for example, then being like, you're nasty. How could you do such a disgusting thing? You hole, you slut, like I feel like that kind of like shaming, imposed shaming, you might think like, yeah, I'm stopping the person from having sex outside of marriage, but you're just making them feel worse about themselves pretty much. And slash, or they're going to continue to do it, but they're just not going to let you know that that's what they're doing. So you're not really even resolving the problem, you know. But somebody, if you really want your child or whatever to like not do that, instead of like shaming them, like once you find out, then it's like, hey, can we sit down and can we talk about this? And it's like, so I did realize that you did this and boom boom, and I'm gonna admit, I was a little bit disappointed, because I thought that our Muslim or Christian or whatever beliefs, like we were in alignment with that, but I did want to at least hear you out. And then I wanted to explain what my reasoning behind why I really, really urge you to save yourself for marriage or whatever like that should be the case. And let's talk about this. Let's in that way. I feel like that would be more effective. Again, it requires more patience, but I think that that would potentially be more effective in actually getting that person to stop what they're doing, and they won't, and because now they can decide for themselves, like, oh, this is why I would not do it. It's no longer because, like, oh, my dad is shaming me, but it's because they've decided, like, oh yeah, my dad made sense. And so yeah, now I don't want to behave in this manner anymore. That's kind of how I'm seeing it. Um, so funny enough, before Joyce even said her example about firing her parents, what I was going to say was like, even as Joyce was speaking about like how so many Asians like go to get therapy eventually, I was thinking like, dang, and being the type of person I am, I'm like, man, I wonder how hard it is to just sit down and reason with them, like, and just be like, Mom, Dad, can we sit down? Can we have a talk? So first off, I would like to say before I finish, like before you guys say anything, I want y'all to know that I'm gonna give you the opportunity to speak because I do want to hear what y'all's opinions and perspectives are. But I want to at least say everything that I have to say first. Please try your best not to interrupt because that kind of derails me and this is that. So with that said, you guys tend to like make these insults about me. You guys tend to do this. You guys tend to do that. And I just want you to know that this is the effect that it's having on me. And then you think, I'm sure that you're probably well intending and you're thinking that, oh, it's going to help me to make more money. But then honestly, not in like, a mean way, but if anything, I'm going to use that same money to go to therapy to actually unpack all of these ways that you guys have been hurting me. Like, I don't know if you realize like what you guys say, like has it's actually been hurting me in these ways and boom, boom, even though you're intending it for that way. And then it kind of also defeats the purpose of, me getting more money and stuff like that. So is there a way that we could probably like work on this? I know that you guys have like, been traditionalized to, think in this way. Dad, I'm sure that you've been raised this way and everything. And, you would say, oh, it turned out just fine, but you're kind of doing this same exact thing that your parents did now to me. And I want to kind of break that. What do you guys think about this? And talking like that versus like going to have you parents no shame, you guys are disgusting, all of you Asians are just like this, and your dad, you're just like your father, everything that you hated about him, now you've become that, like you need to go back into your room and think about it, and I'm so sick of all of you, and whatever. Like I feel like that's imposed shaming, and that would be way less effective than what I just also demonstrated. So that's my opinion of the matter. And that's why, like I said, like once again, I think that it requires more patience to not just lash out and impose shame on somebody, but actually sit down, have a discussion, and really get them to think. And then if shame comes up within them, like, you never really said shame, but now if Joyce's dad is all of a sudden like, Joyce, like, I feel ashamed now to have like realized in this very moment how much I've become just like my own father and all the things that I didn't like about him when I was growing up, stuff that I didn't even notice until just now. I'm really ashamed. Well, Joyce didn't impose shame on him. That shame came from within himself, that guilt. But Joyce now greets him with love as he continues to work on that and everything like that. And then boom, so shame that comes like internally as a response, I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. I think that that could actually be necessary, like that type of guilt, but imposing shame on someone and like forcing them, like it's a shame that you guys even call yourself parents and stuff like that. I think that's messed up. Which, by the way, Joyce, I'm in no way insinuating that's what you did when you fired them. I was just thinking already of that like hypothetical example before you said that. Um, Lastly, and I'll make this part short, to answer Lilette's question, I think that a time where I've been shamed uh, was there was a time where I had controversial, so be prepared for this, but I'm literally trying to cut out all of the unnecessary details. Long story short, there was a rap beef going on between Drake and Kendrick Lamar this year, and everybody knows that I really did not support the idea of beef. I think that it's like childish. I think that it's immature. I think it's very like low vibrational energy, stuff like that. I don't, especially between the Black community. It's like, come on, let's not do this. Like let's build each other up, not tear each other down, kind of thing. However, if it's happening, like if it's happening regardless, then admittedly, I'm gonna still listen to the songs. And so I was talking to somebody who had told me, like, I think that it's funny and it's kind of, weird or interesting, whatever, that you claim that you don't really support, the beef and stuff like that. But then every time a new song for it is dropped, like now you're like listening to it and you're dissecting it and all that. And I was like, yeah, no, I think that there's a difference between me actually going to support and like be like, yeah, 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 like Drake, Kendrick, fight, 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 versus like, dang, I really hope that they don't fight. But if they're fighting anyway, I'm gonna go and take a front row seat because it's already happening regardless. I'm not going to be there cheering like, yeah, get him Drake, yeah, get him Kendrick. I'm going to watch because that this much I can admit, I'm nosy. It's happening regardless of whether I want it to or not. So I may as well be entertained. And if good art is coming from it, even if where it's coming from is bad, but like a lot of clever, witty lines were coming in those like rap bars and everything like that. And it was a lot for me to analyze. Like I was enjoying that much. So then I said, I think that I can look at the most heinous of things and be able to glean good from that. And so I tried to find a metaphor or analogy, to be more exact, that could best represent what I'm talking about. And I went with Hitler. I said, I made the disclaimer and I said, Hitler, literally, I do not agree with anything that Hitler did. I'm not saying that I even like Hitler or admire Hitler or whatever, whatever. I feel like what Hitler did was absolutely treacherous, heinous, all of that disgusting. Just to make that clear. But even with all of what Hitler did, I'm very fascinated, admittedly, with how Hitler was able to climb to that position of power and be able to use that power and that influence to get people to do even the most craziest and heinous of stuff. Like that is really fascinating to me. And if anything, I kind of like want to continue to learn more about that. And if anything, I start to then think like, imagine if we could use that same power, but for good. If we can learn to harness the same type of power that Hitler had, but then we use that for good things instead. And the person I was talking about was like, the person I was talking to was like, I'm sorry, you like pretty much they got on this whole like thing like, oh, so you're pretty much like power hungry and boom boom, and like that's so sick of you for like to like actually admire Hitler and boom boom. And it's like, okay, Hitler probably was not the best example, especially when we just went from like rap beef to Hitler, probably a big leap. But in my head I was really like trying to make it clear, like, look, I'm not actually talking about, oh, I love what Hitler did or anything like that. I'm talking about the concept of like this idea of power, whatever. Like, but the person was like actively like saying like power corrupts people and this is that, and like, and you, especially since you've like admitted to like being capable of manipulation and stuff like that in the past, like then you were the last person who should deserve that type of. I'm like, oh, okay. And so yeah, I was being shamed in that moment. And yeah, that kind of hurt. And I think that there's also been times like where I've been shamed because of like growing up as a Christian, especially, and like then having like my dominant energy. For those who are familiar with Jean Shinoda Bolen's book, Goddesses in Every Woman and Gods in Every Man, my dominant anima energy is Aphrodite energy. So it's like, very honestly speaking, like it's a lot of like sexually charged energy. And then, growing up with the background that I had, then there was a lot of like sexual suppression. So my early 20s especially was just really me figuring out a lot of stuff about my own, sexual urges and stuff like that, and like trying to do it in the context of being a Christian and all that. And like I received a lot of shame from fellow Christians, and then even like people who are not Christians, but they knew that I was a Christian because I would slip up in certain ways, and just trying to navigate these waters and stuff like that. And like, and yeah, rather than like, having like a sit down and like actually talking with me and like trying to, hey Denzel, like, what's going on here? Like what's happening? It was like, oh, you're disgusting, or like, oh, stuff like that. And it's not to say that like, well, yeah, I guess like that, like, I guess what I'm saying there is like that shame only made me suppress those urges and stuff worse. And when the more that you suppress things, the more that it bleeds out in ways that you don't want for it to. And now I'm glad that as I'm approaching my 30s, then I have such a better, like more outlet for how that energy is made, and where it goes. And then also, people that I'm able to actually talk to openly about it. My wife knows everything about that. And like, there's not really like shame that comes from that. And then I just keep those aspects of myself away from people who I feel are prone to shaming me, because now I'm able to work through that. So yeah. And yeah, but lastly, I would have to think a little bit more of a time where I've shamed other people, because even I feel like even in my Christian evangelical days, I really never shamed people before. Um, I think that I've always been the type to like try to like really figure out like, hey, like what's going on here, like. And my whole thing is, if I can help you understand my logic, if you're a rational person, then you can also understand, oh yeah, maybe this isn't the right thing to do, rather than me being like, you sick, disgusting human being, like, have you no shame, that type of thing. That's how I see it, of course. So the end.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And what I'm getting out of that is I'm almost visualizing an orchestra. So
Mm.
if like shame is like, I guess, one of the instruments, but it's not causing the person to feel shame. Rather, it's just explaining how you're feeling. Like you use the sentence, I might be a little disappointed that you did this, but then it included all these other thoughts too, and
Yeah, yeah.
also an acceptance of them as well. Then it's okay. But if shame is the only instrument, like it's the drums, and usually people, when they play shame, they usually only play shame and that's it. And it's like this
Yeah,
loud ass
yeah.
drums. And you're like, that's a
Drum
horrible,
solo.
yeah, during not the time for a drum solo. Yeah. And so it's excessively done, and it's almost like a mono note. People use it as a
Wow.
one trick pony when they're upset at someone, and it doesn't have this effect that they're trying to play. And so I'm almost thinking about how, when it comes to shame, it is an emotion, but it's also a communication style too. Like you gave the
Mhm,
example of like, if I talk to my parents in a very understanding way, what would happen? And I feel
mhm.
like as an NFJ, I felt the same exact way. And I've actually
Right.
tried to do that 10,000 times in my life.
I believe
And
you.
none of the times has it ever landed, because I realized that it's the communication style of the language. So the only time it took me 27 years to actually do it is to actually talk to my parents in the same way that they talk to me, is the
Mm,
only time they have ever listened to me in my entire life.
wow.
And because they only listen to shame, but that's because they don't see it as shame. They see it as a tough communication style. And some people will take it in as shame. If you read into it, you will take it as
Mhm,
shame. So oftentimes shame requires some level of you reading into it too. Like someone can call you "you nasty," "you
mhm,
horrible," but unless you read into it, you don't take it into shame. Like I know some people who identify as Enneagram 8s, they actually, if you say certain things like "you're horrible," "you suck," they won't take any of that to shame. And that's because they can take the toughness in the words and not read into it in a way that's self-deprecating. So in some
mm,
level, shame is also an openness to being influenced by the other person.
mm,
So in certain cultures or in certain ways that people communicate that are more transactional, it can seem very shameful, because like it's kind of like, if I say "you nasty," then you're going to
mhm,
act differently. That's almost like an if then equation. It's almost kind of
mm,
technical, it's kind of logical, it's kind of dry. So
mm,
some people who naturally understand transactional language will not read between the lines and like take away shame. But like as someone who's like let's say like deeply empathic, like maybe you or me were more likely to notice how it would cause shame in another person, or feel the shame ourselves from hearing someone call like someone despicable.
That's
Like
where
it's all like a frame of mind.
yeah. That's
I
good.
love that.
That's definitely a segment that's going in the trailer. Like that was the symphony like orchestra thing. That was really good.
Yeah, it was. It was, Joyce. I really like that because also it kind of highlights that there are some instruments people hear more than others.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
like your example, because I was going to say, I was like, some of the questions I had for you, Denzel, is, hey, let's like unpack this because I was getting the sense that like perhaps everyone experiences shame differently, actually.
Oh yeah.
Or perhaps it's experienced the same, but they react to it differently.
Hmm.
And because of their reaction, then they evaluate that maybe we evaluate shame based off of our reaction. That
Hmm.
shame is neither good nor evil, it's just what comes after it. And if your reaction to shame is uh we can all say that everyone's reactions to shame is different, and then we would attach a label to shame based off of our consistent pattern of reaction.
Right.
And so to Joyce's point, like I have Enneagram 8 in my tri-type, and one of the I find shame for me as an extremely powerful motivator. And like, just to answer my own question, I feel like of all of the emotions, I've experienced shame the most.
Mm,
And I have actually been able to Midas touch it into gold. I've been able to become a converter of that powerful, intense emotion. And so that kind of like how there are creatures that can consume certain things, and creatures that if they consume that thing, it kills them. Um, and we need both creatures. We need the creatures that eat toxins, and we need the creatures that create them. And I feel like I'm like an eater of a toxin,
mm,
where I take that shame and I'm gonna show other people how to convert it into something that is beautiful. And that I think I have this like innate reaction now that I've learned how to convert it, that because I went the extreme form. What if shame didn't exist? Then it would take a huge part of me away, actually, because I use it as motivation in order to convert the toxins into good in the world,
yeah.
and to show people. It's almost like look what humanity can do. It's almost like this moment where we fly. I wish I was there in the moment that humanity flew, because it was in that moment symbolically that we defied the heavens, that we went against our birth of being ground dwelling creatures, and we defied the heavens, and we went against gravity, we went against the winds, we went against all that we thought was, and that could be personified as shame, right? And without that, and then we ascended to the moon, of all things. And the great amount of inspiration that came from just peeling through and breaking through, and literally taking something negative and turning it into something positive is such a rich mineral of life, in the same way that burning down a forest is not necessarily bad, because it actually, the soil is now nutrient rich. And so I think the real answer here is that we're talking, or shame is going to happen. It's we do have control over it in two ways. The first control is how we take it, convert it. We do have the ability to convert it and make and impress upon even the mass populace of, look at what I've done. I felt this way my entire life, and now I am made anew, you know. And then there's also, how are we going to give it? Let's be I keep on hearing from both you and Joy, or Denzel and Joyce, um, that there is a certain way that it's good delivery and bad delivery. And I kind of like another metaphor, I guess, is caramel. Have you guys ever made caramel before? Okay. I looked this up because I don't even know how I got there, but um, I'm going to just read you a short thing. So there's 4 temperatures that are significant for caramel. So you put sugar in a pan. Excuse me. At 245 degrees Fahrenheit, the caramel reaches the firm ball stage. At 320, it becomes brittle when cooled. At 355, it hardens. And then at 365, it returns to being soft and sticky. I think shame is an emulsifier. It pushes away, but pushing also can push you towards something else. And I'm glad that it's pushed me in the way that it has, because I've also found my true friends. It's pushed me away from the people who never would have been able to really understand me. And it's pushed me towards people who feel the same way. And we've made something great together.
Yeah, that was very fascinating. Um, Especially you talking about it being a huge part of you. Because I guess it goes back to that whole thing, like, oh, if I was not shamed, or if I did not have shame or whatever, like, I wouldn't be who I am today, kind of thing. And it's like, oh, well, okay, no, I do like Lilette how she is today, so I guess.
And
But
it's really interesting because it's not identity based, right? Like
right,
I want to be clear, it's a conversion. I
yeah,
took
yeah,
it and I made something with it, and not making of myself. I don't see myself as a making thing. I am who I am, who I am, who I am, and always will be, with or
mhm,
without shame.
yeah,
Um, so I would have been the same before shame, but I wouldn't have done what I've done without it.
okay, okay. That actually clarifies things a little bit more. Then, and I was gonna say, uh, just to clarify more, did you mean like imposed shame, like shame from other people, is what kind of was got you to where it is, or was it mainly like shame that you experienced internally?
I wonder. Yeah, it's normally feedback. I've always seen shame as feedback
Mhm,
because uh, I would always fight against
mhm,
people. That would be my first response. My first first response was always to fight, and so I couldn't see past that, and I required as a person growing up, as a kid, nothing got through to me unless it was intense emotion, and it was a brought really good things to me because I realized, you know, because I think like eights especially have the issue of feeling like they're just a one person army and
mhm,
that they can just bulldoze a room,
mhm,
and that sometimes the only way to tell an eight that they need to stop is for the room to turn against them
mhm.
and for
Yeah,
them to experience shame and say, you need to stop this.
you
This is
know
not
what?
cool. You need to stop this. You need to check yourself because we're n- you're making us feel horrible. We're going to reflect that upon you.
I think that's really interesting because last week, uh, I I had this huge. I'm trying to look for the proper word because fight was not really the word, but it was quite it was an intense engagement with an Enneagram 8. Um, and it got even a little bit violent on their end, to the point where now I've discontinued interacting with this person, because it escalated to that level, where like they were attacking me, and so it's like, okay, like this should never be the case, especially over something so small. And yeah, I'm one, and this person actively uses shame as their favorite instrument. So it's like I'm wondering if I were to, I guess, retaliate finally with some shame in that sense, how they would have like would that have actually been
Mhm.
what does it for them?
I would say
Like,
so.
yeah,
I
They
would
like
might
say
even
sometimes
respect
if
you more.
exactly, that's what I would say is like I actually will end up respecting the person more because they can they can see the full I want to say like the full me, but it's horrible because you just described a violent person. Um, so I also don't want to see the full me, but I would say that with eight, there is definitely the intensity within a person, almost like a demon within,
yeah,
But it's not like in a way that you're going after people. It's more like um, they're just intense.
yeah.
I
Hmm.
think it's just there's everyone's intensity levels here, but their natural intensity levels here, and so they don't really realize anything below that. I guess
Yeah. Like
that's what it
eight,
feels like to me.
they
Good.
need feedback. So even if it's
Hmm
feedback in the form of shame, it's still helpful.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, where shame is an intense, rather intense feeling for anyone else, but for an eight, it's like, oh, I felt something.
This is stressful
Yeah.
because I'm like, I've greeted this person with peace and all of the things like for a while. And yeah, and I think that that's what sustained the dynamic up to this point. But yeah, after things flew off the handle that day, I just all I could really do is just like look at the person and like they could tell like I was disappointed deeply. And especially because, the next day they tried to like interact with me like casually or whatever, and I almost pretended as if like they didn't even exist anymore to me. And, I guess maybe that's my way of like, like maybe they feel it, maybe that's giving them an internal shame because it's like,
That's so interesting.
yeah, like, cause it's like,
Because I had a
ah,
similar
Denzel,
experience,
Denzel
Denzel.
always, like, at the very least, like, forgives and, does this and does that. But right now, Denzel's literally like pretending like I don't even exist. Like, Denzel's
Right.
just, it's like, yeah, like, I'm just done with you. Like
hmm
that was it. Like I can't believe that you did that. And and I did write like this whole like long like note, like 3 paragraphs, like just detailing like all of like what I feel and all of that. And even then I was trying to like be like, kind and like but then still like firm and stuff like that.
hmm
Um
They
but
just don't
I
experience the
I didn't
same
send it to you.
escalation path, is what I'd say.
Mm,
So that escalation path that you thought looked like this,
mhm.
like this, and it
Yeah.
was this big, was actually
Mhm.
this tiny. Was that small. And
Goodness.
so it's everything's like dulled, I guess.
Goodness.
The and so there's a certain amount of force that's almost I feel like I'm describing this so badly.
You can relate it to a deaf man. You know, like when people have trouble hearing, they speak louder
Deaf man.
themselves.
Yeah.
It's like, I need to yell at you. It's like, it hurts my ears when you talk like that. It's like, but I can't hear, so it seems like normal volume for them. So,
Yeah, that's
Oh,
that's a
yeah.
great way of like putting it because yeah, that's exactly what I'm kind of like hearing. Like, like
Yeah.
there's certain things where like people will not hear it until it's at a certain frequency.
Yeah.
Whereas like dogs might hear it like, oh man, like, oh I don't hear that whistle, like that's so loud, stuff like that. And even for me, it's like an HSP, it's like dang, that subway train that's screeching like above me, like it just hurts my ears. And then people are like,
Mhm.
oh, it's kind of normal. And it's like, so I'm like, yeah. And I guess the bottom line from what I'm like, getting from all of this is like know when to apply shame, know when to actually use that instrument and who to use it with, which now I guess then would have to be like, okay, so then how do you know who? Because like for me, shame doesn't. Well, I guess it depends on what your goal is. I was gonna say shame doesn't work on me, but like it I don't like that. Like when people shame me, I lose respect for you. I really like I start to like detest you as a person. Um and so it's interesting
Mm,
that you're like, yeah, like for me, like I will gain respect. And if anything, if
right,
I'm
right.
shaming somebody else, then it's almost like I'm losing respect for myself because to me, like who I am as a person, I'm like, Denzel, you don't stoop that low, like
Mhm.
and so, but now it's like, so you saying like, yeah, I'd actually gain respect.
Yeah.
This isn't personal towards you. I'm just thinking of like other people. I'm like, but I even like these types of people. Like you're
Mhm.
kind of like, why in order to people please, to like appease to you and to gain your respect, I have to go outside of who I am as a person to do something that I don't naturally like to do.
Mhm.
And that makes me feel weird. But
Yeah.
also, I'm like, but you can't help that, you respect when people might be like that. So then it's like right now in real time,
It's
I'm
like
like
the
thinking,
opposite
should
of
I?
HSP. What's the opposite of
Yeah,
HSP? It's literally that, where it's like if we're gonna have a spectrum of appreciation, acknowledging different kinds of people exist, then we have to acknowledge the opposite, which is the opposite of an HSP. I don't know what to call it, but
yeah.
um, yeah, and
Somebody who's
that's
pretty
why I
much like
was like
not like
cognizant.
somebody who's like
No, yeah,
dulled to all of the senses
dulled.
and
Yeah.
like sensory stuff. And it's just like, so yeah, and I guess that means like, so should I like I'm not really like a loud speaker, or like I don't like flatulate around people, stuff like that, whatever. But if I like now, metaphorically speaking, do I have to like I guess it would depend on how much I really love the person, like to be like, okay, I'm not usually somebody who speaks very loudly, or I'm not usually somebody who like does this, but like since this is the only way that you hear, or the only way that you like, then I'm going to go out of my way to be this way toward this person, because maybe it's just equally the same for them to go out of their way to appeal to me. And it's like, okay, either we just don't interact, or we're just not friends, or
Mhm.
we have to find some sort of like compromise.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel the exact same way as you, Denzel, there. Like, I metabolize shame the same way that you do.
mhm,
And I guess another hot take on shame too is that sometimes people use shame because they're insecure that they won't be taken seriously if they don't do it otherwise. It's like if I
mhm.
don't call you nasty, if I don't call you treacherous, you're not
Right.
gonna take what I say or feel or think seriously. So it's like a almost a desire to be heard and seen on that individual's part, and they believe that each person vouches for their own desire to feel heard and seen. So you have to return back with me to with shame. So I know that you're trying to hard to be heard and seen too. Otherwise, I don't think you're being serious.
This is all just so disgusting to me. I'm like, I'm actually having like visceral like why, and my own bias and judgment is like these people are traumatized and hurt. And then I'm like, but am I actually the traumatized and hurt one? Are we both the traumatized and hurt one? Is there a right or wrong? 'Cause I'm thinking like a real healed person would not need that. But then I'm like, or is my idea of like what the real healed person thing is actually like another version of a traumatized person in some sort of way. But then it's like, but I'm only traumatized because of those people. And if they didn't exist, then we'd all be like how I am. But then I'm like, but I don't know. So I'm literally thinking about all this like in the moment. But even just now, like what you said, Joyce, I'm thinking of like a time where years back I hopped the subway in New York City, and an undercover cop came and like stopped me and everything like that. And I was like, okay, and I was like, I stopped, and I let them like, do whatever they had to do. But then as I was like reaching for my ID, then or like no, like they were like, get out your wallet now, like, and they were just being like very assertive and aggressive with me. And I literally had to look up at the cop, and in a gentle way, I said, hey, I know that you are a cop here in the Bronx, and you probably deal with a whole bunch of ghetto type of people that, are very like, dismissive towards you and rude and all of that. And so you feel the need to assert yourself on me more than like you really need to. I want you to know, like, I'm very compliant, and you don't have to do that with me. I'm going to comply and I'm going to do this and do that. So I'm just getting my ID for you. Please just give me a moment and try to be a little bit more toned down. Thank you. And after that, he still kind of was like, but he toned down like a lot. Because yeah, it's like with other New Yorkers, you do kind of need to be like, hey, stop, but like with me, it's like, yo, stop that. Like, cause now you're gonna actually upset me, and then you're gonna have to start speaking to me like that. But the more that you speak to me like that, the more upset I'm gonna get, because it's like, why are you speaking to me like as if I'm some sort of uh like Neanderthal? Like, no, I don't need that. Like, I'm a very civil person. But I guess for a lot of people, it's like, well, how will I be able to tell? Like, how do I know that you're a civil person? I need to shame you, because most people probably need shame, which in my opinion, I'm like, no, most people don't need shame, but who knows? Maybe Lilette needed shame. Maybe Lilette is a Neanderthal. I'm kidding.
Confirmed. I took the 21 is me test. I'm just kidding. I actually have not. I still need to do that. But hey, I wouldn't be surprised. Um, I I really appreciate that kind of communication though, and I will say that it is the growth path of some people to not rely on it. And I think back to Joyce's parents relying on it as a form of communication. I think of my statement with the eights where it's like, yeah, the feeling of feelings are dulled. So because shame is an intense feeling, it's useful. Obviously, there are other intense feelings out there that should probably be used in space instead of that. But um like bottom line, shame is a way of communicating, and you can communicate badly and you can communicate well. And I appreciate the people who communicate well. I think we all do.
Mhm.
And being cognizant of how, like, we would really have to, take it into a different conversation or another conversation, um, to break down really, like, when is it done well? When is it not done well?
Mhm.
Um, I think that would be the next step for this conversation, actually. When is it okay? When is it not? Um, Actually getting into the nuts and bolts of it, because at the end of the day, it is an effective tool. It is one of the most intense emotions humans can experience as a social creature, and an intellectual one, because shame is judgment. Shame is a form of feedback, and it's experienced differently by everybody. Um, some people don't feel it as much, other people feel it a lot. So I definitely think that if there's anything to take away from the conversation, is that shame is not a one size fits all. People do experience it differently. It's a communication tool. We're still not really sure, like, whether it should be used or not. I actually still prefer when someone walks me through something, but most people aren't patient, and I think the world actually just needs more patience, period. And so maybe it's connected to that. Um, and yeah, perhaps like next conversation, because I would really love to continue like digging into it,
Mm.
you know. I'm kind of thinking like, what did we learn here? What are our takeaways? Those were mine.
Yeah. When you talk about Lilette, the world needing more patience, it brings upon this thought that shame is almost like a fast food, or it's like a meal replacement. Like, oh, you can get this immediate action done with this thing. And it's like, should that be a long-term solution? Can we make healthy fast food? Or should
Right.
we find a way to add other nutrients or foods into our meals
Yeah,
so
I
that,
love that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think as an INFJ, there is this innate goodwill I have towards other people. So sometimes shame can be a very abrupt emotion. So it's like they go from 0 to 100, and it almost feels like they're directly not experiencing that goodwill that I place that onto them. It's like almost like I
Mm.
believe that you can become the best version of yourself if I believe in you. It's almost like not being believed in back. There's some sort of like violation um of peace possibly, or
Yeah.
connection. Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that there's a huge violation of peace, because I've heard some people call shame the nuclear option. And I do believe that shame is a nuclear option. I think there's a lot of things you could do before you get to the part of shame. And that it should be practice, because when you have the time to do it, like, do that. It's the better way. Don't go right to shame.
Yeah, and so I wonder what would happen if we shamed the audience into liking and subscribing. Y'all suck. Go press the like and subscribe, or else you guys don't deserve life. All
Let me
right,
tell you
so
this right now. If you have not subscribed to this channel by now, you're not a good person. You're not ethical. You don't care for people. You're a disgusting human being who needs to learn how to be a better human being. You're polluting the earth around you with your putrid aura. Your stench is impacting every living organism and non-living organism around you until you get it purified and cleansed by hitting subscribe, hitting the bell button, and watching these videos. Sure, we do not post every single week, but you're still going to continue to get these videos because every single hour-long video that we do end up posting is healing you. It's helping you to become a much better person in this life so that you can be a better person for other people in your life. And if you're actually a good human being, then you would subscribe so that you can become a better human being for other people. So go ahead and subscribe to The Knife Show right now and continue to watch our videos, and then go the extra step and share the videos with other people so that other people can be subscribed as well.
And until
Thank
next
you.
time,
Stay
stay
sharp.
sharp.
また夜が